Local NPC deputy wants national security law to be retroactive and to include harsher penalties for those found guilty. The U.S. unveils visa restrictions against Chinese officials in response to the security law. And police ban the annual July 1st democracy rally. Good evening and thanks for joining me. Hong Kong deputies to the National People's Congress are in Beijing ahead of a three-day meeting during which it's expected that national security legislation for the city will be finalized. A Hong Kong member of the NPC Standing Committee says he will convey various opinions about the security law to delegates. Dong Yao Nie reports.
Today, all eyes are on those leaving for Beijing for a meeting of the National People's Congress Standing Committee. Among them are Tam Yu-chung, the SAR's sole deputy that can vote in the session, and about 10 local delegates invited to sit in on the meeting. During the three-day session starting tomorrow, the nation's top legislative body is expected to vote on the contentious national security law for Hong Kong, although the meeting's agenda list hasn't listed that section. Tam Yu-chung promised he will reflect Hong Kongers' views. Those include calls to set up a retroactive period of the law and tighten penalties on national security crimes. Tam said he will also deliver appeals from the News Executives Association to release the full draft of the law before it is voted on. Ip Kwok Him, who will also attend the meeting, said today it is very likely that Beijing would unveil the drafted law before passing it. Ip said penalties laid out in the law should be harsher, noting that some subversion acts in the United States can lead to life imprisonment. Another local deputy, Stanley Ng, also wants the law to be retroactive. Many government officials reiterated their support for the law in interviews with the state-run broadcaster CCTV. Meanwhile, pan-democratic lawmakers like Wu Chi-wai are concerned about Beijing having jurisdiction over a tiny number of criminal acts in the city. He worries as the NPC has the basic law's rights of final interpretation, the central government's sovereignty under specific circumstances would eventually become the new normal. Dong Yao Nie, TVB News.
Meanwhile, Washington announced visa restrictions on Chinese officials responsible for curbing Hong Kong's freedoms and autonomy. That triggered an angry response from Beijing, which warned of potential countermeasures. Haley Zhou has that story.
Washington is coming after Beijing with a concrete response to the pending national security law for Hong Kong. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has announced visa restrictions on Chinese officials and their family members believed to be responsible for or complicit in undermining Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. It is the first concrete action taken by the U.S. against China over the legislation. Beijing hit back. The Chinese embassy in Washington called for an immediate retraction. It said China doesn't govern Hong Kong according to the Sino-British Joint Declaration, but according to China's constitution and Hong Kong's basic law. It said China will continue to take strong measures to protect its sovereignty. But in Hong Kong, one Democratic Party lawmaker believes visa restrictions aren't strong enough to sway China.
The central government may, very likely that they have taken into consideration already. So from my point of view, I don't think simply relies on the restriction on the visa will be have any effect on the enactment of the National Security Act. But that will affect very, very strong views coming from the international community.
Some analysts say not naming the officials facing sanctions would reduce the impact. The Hong Kong government has denounced the passage of the Hong Kong Autonomy Act in the U.S. Senate, which states China's obligations under the joint declaration signed by the British government and registered with the UN are legally binding. It said the implementation of the one country, two systems framework in Hong Kong is entirely up to China. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
For the first time, police have banned the annual July 1st protest march on the 23rd anniversary of the city's return to Chinese rule. Officers cited fears about the risk to public health and the potential for violence. As Pinky Wong reports, organizers plan to appeal.
The Civil Human Rights Front has been organizing the annual July 1st rally since 2003. They earlier applied for permission to hold the annual march from Victoria Park in Causeway Bay to the central government offices. For the first time in 17 years, police issued a letter of objection to the event.
This is certainly a political decision to avoid a large crowd going on street against the national security law that might be passed before the 1st of July. And it's quite obvious that the government wants to create a false appearance to the international community that there's no one opposing the national security legislation.
Police cited current rules limiting public gatherings of no more than 50 people due to COVID-19, adding that public assemblies and demonstrations are not exempted. Police also mentioned violent incidents which happened at public assemblies and rallies organized by the group over the past 12 months. Officers believe that some participants may deviate from the planned route due to the unstable social atmosphere, which is not under control of the group. Separately, the Appeal Board on Public Meetings and Processions has upheld the police ban on protests proposed for tomorrow and July 1st. The planned rallies were initiated by pro-democracy district councillor Andy Cho. Police earlier cited concerns about public health and the invisibility of implementing social distancing rules as reasons. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
Hong Kong has recorded no local transmission of COVID-19 for the past 2 weeks. However, an imported case today brought the city's total infection count to 1,197. The latest patient is a 39-year-old woman from the Philippines. She has been taken to hospital. On the mainland, 21 new coronavirus cases were reported on Friday. 17 infections were local, all of which emerged from Beijing. Authorities have obtained a number of samples from the Xinfadi wholesale market, the epicenter of the latest outbreak in the capital. According to Wu Guizhen, chief biosecurity expert at China's CDC, the samples collected are identical to those circulating in Europe in March and April. Turning overseas, due to an alarming spike in COVID-19 cases, Texas and Florida have made sharp reversals, clamping down on bars and restaurants, with authorities urging people to stay at home. This comes as U.S. Vice President Mike Pence defends Donald Trump's moves to hold election rallies during the pandemic. Leslie Tang has more.
The U.S. is back in crisis mode as the number of confirmed daily COVID-19 cases surged to a record 45,000. Many states have announced they will not go forward with the next phases of their reopening plans. In particular, the populous states of Texas and Florida are doing sharp reversals. The governor of Texas has ordered all bars to reshut, saying large groups congregating in bars are partly to blame for the spike. Texas has reported more than 17,000 new cases in the past 3 days. Restaurant dining must be scaled back, and people are being urged to stay at home again. The governor had been pushing for one of the most aggressive reopening schedules until now. Harris County, which includes Houston, has raised its COVID-19 threat to the highest level. The flip-flopping is creating confusion and pressure for small business owners.
One day we might have the county judge telling us to do one thing, and then a couple of days later, the Governor Abbott might issue an executive order that totally supersedes that.
Meanwhile, Florida has banned alcohol at bars after the daily number of new cases neared 9,000. State officials have blamed the new outbreak on young adults ignoring social distancing. Some beaches will also be shut over the 4th of July weekend. After 2 months without a briefing, the White House Coronavirus Task Force made an appearance. Its top expert called on people to do their part.
You have an individual responsibility to yourself, but you have a societal responsibility.
But Vice President Mike Pence had to respond to the blatant disregard for social distancing that U.S. President Donald Trump has demonstrated with his campaign rallies.
The freedom of speech and the right to peaceably assemble is enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. And even in a health crisis, the American people don't forfeit our constitutional rights.
Leslie Tang, TVB News.
Facebook will now start flagging all newsworthy posts from politicians that break its rules, including those from the U.S. president.
There's no newsworthy exemption to content that incites violence or suppresses voting. Even if a politician or government official says it, if we determine that content may lead to violence or deprive people of their right to vote, we're going to take that content down, no matter who says it.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg previously refused to take action against Donald Trump's posts, suggesting mail-in ballots will lead to voter fraud. Zuckerberg said people deserve to hear unfiltered statements from political leaders. Twitter, by contrast, slapped a "Get the Facts" label on posts from Trump. By not highlighting the posts from the president, the social network received criticism from Trump's opponents, as well as current and former Facebook employees. Coming up, worker killed in industrial accident in Kai Tak. At least 6 wounded in a stabbing attack in Scotland. And the House votes to make Washington, D.C. America's 51st state. Welcome back. A man was killed this afternoon while working at a construction site in Kai Tak. Kana Chu reports.
In the aftermath of the industrial accident, bamboo scaffolding of the building under construction was left ripped apart and dangling in the air. At around 2 p.m., authorities were alerted to a person who had collapsed beneath a pile of objects, including bamboo sticks, on the structure's level 2 podium. Arriving minutes later, they found the man dead, in addition to a double T iron 1 floor below him. Measuring 6 meters in length and about 10 tons in weight, the steel beam is thought to have fallen off the building's 17th floor, where the deceased was reportedly working on. Investigations are ongoing as to why it fell and the role it played in the man's death. The deceased was wearing a harness when discovered. Not an ethnic Chinese, authorities have yet to determine his nationality. Fire engines, ambulances, and a total of 45 firefighters and 7 rescuers were deployed to the scene. They relied on sniffer dogs and live detectors in their search for any additional deaths or injuries. Joined by staff from the Labor Department, police also launched a probe into the cause of the incident. The construction site on Mo Kyun Street is owned by Nanfeng Group. Its subcontractor Hip Hing Construction is responsible for the building work. Kana Chu, TVB News.
The government's employment support scheme has received a lower than expected number of applications. Secretary for Labor and Welfare Law Chi Kwong says less than 70% of Hong Kong employers have applied for the first batch of these subsidies. Law says there is a lack of understanding of the scheme, which supports businesses by paying workers half of their wages. Meanwhile, he has ruled out the possibility of subsidizing employers of inbound domestic helpers who need to go into quarantine.
We try to restrict the movement of domestic helpers from Hong Kong to and fro their homeland. Any other measures, although we like to help, but if that would sort of encourage such movement, that will be inconsistent with our anti-epidemic measures.
The funeral service for Macau casino tycoon Stanley Ho will be held on July 9th. Ho's family issued an obituary notice in the press about the arrangements. His 4 wives and 17 children announced that the funeral will be held on the 9th next month at the Hong Kong Funeral Home. Stanley Ho died at the age of 98 at the Hong Kong Sanatorium and Hospital on May 26th. Police seized a batch of valuable fragrant wood called agar wood in Clearwater Bay today, worth an estimated $600,000. Officers found 8 kilos of wood, which came from an endangered species of tree. Police say they discovered a tent set up on the hillside of High Junk Peak and believe 2 illegal immigrants were hiding there. They believe the men cut down the trees. No arrests have been made so far. And overseas again, a violent attack in the heart of Glasgow sent several people, including a police officer, to hospital. Officials say the rampage is not terrorism related, but they are still searching for a motive. Peter Caveus has details.
Police vehicles clogged Glasgow's city centre after a violent stabbing attack. It happened at a hotel that was being used as temporary housing during the pandemic. A male suspect stabbed and wounded an officer before he was shot dead. A witness described the chaotic scene.
We were working down the streets there, and we heard some screaming and a lot of commotion. And we looked out over from the window, and we could see a lot of panic. We could see someone down below on the steps of the hotel lying there. We couldn't see much, but we went downstairs, and by the time we got down there, we heard the police were already on scene, and incredible response from them.
Police officer David White was among the half dozen that needed medical attention.
Officers were on the scene within 2 minutes, and armed officers shortly afterwards, and the incident was quickly contained. A man was shot by armed police and has subsequently died. 6 other men are in hospital for treatment, including a 42-year-old police officer who is in a critical but stable condition.
Scotland's First Minister had a message of hope after the incident.
I want to send a message to people across Glasgow and across Scotland. When dreadful things like this happen, they shock all of us to our core, but above all they should remind us of what unites us and not what divides us. Glasgow is my home, it's the city I live in, it's the city that I represent, part of in the Scottish Parliament. The people of Glasgow are wonderful people, and I'm sure tonight there will be a sense of coming together in the city of Glasgow, and all of us reminding us what unites us as human beings.
As the investigation continues, police have not shared what prompted the attack or any details about the man killed. Peter Caveos, TVB News.
U.S. lawmakers in the Democratic-controlled House have passed a bill to make the District of Columbia the 51st state of America.
As we approach July 4th, it is long past time to apply the nation's oldest slogan, "No taxation without representation," and the principle of consent of the governed to District of Columbia residents. H.R. 51 would do so, and Congress has both the moral obligation and the constitutional authority to pass the bill.
Lawmakers approved the bill 232 to 180, marking the first time a chamber of Congress has passed a D.C. statehood bill. Supporters say Congress needs to ensure that the city's 700,000 residents are granted full voting rights. The legislation now goes to the Republican-controlled Senate, where it faces strong opposition. And that is the news. Thanks for watching. Good night.